What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Points Per Podcast. Thank you for joining us as always. Tonight, we're getting a little bit negative. We're talking about 6 players that you couldn't pay us to take in fantasy this year, our all fades list, if you will. And I want to make sure you guys know we're not necessarily hating on these players as individuals. We're hating on their prices. We're not fading the players, we're fading the prices. I think that's important to note. We're going to keep it respectful, but I'm excited to get into this one. Let me introduce my co-host here, bring him on. We got Will with us tonight. How you doing this evening, man?
Hey man, I'm doing great. Ready to get negative. Like I said, keeping it respectful though, but ready to talk some fades, definitely.
Absolutely. So before we get down to business and get into the guys on our list, I do want to make sure that you guys know there's a couple guys that we excluded from these lists just because it's kind of cherry picking or like easy guys that we're fading strictly due to their injury concerns. So guys like Joe Mixon, Najee Harris, Chris Godwin that we're not necessarily touching anywhere near their ADPs. We're not talking about them tonight, but just make sure you guys have them on your fade list as well. And then one more thing, we don't have Vishy with us tonight as our third mic. He's going to be returning next week to talk about some of our favorite offenses to invest in for fantasy. And then a little bit later on in the week, Will and I are going to be back to talk about the opposite of this video, our must-target players for your fantasy drafts. So if you guys have drafts coming up prior to those videos coming out and you're interested in the information that we're going to have in those videos, check the link down in the description below to join our Discord, and hopefully we can help you out in there. Also, leave a comment if you want some help in the YouTube algorithm. But yeah, so I think with that, we can get it started. Will, I've been yapping enough already. How about we start with you? Who's your first all fade player?
Absolutely. We're going to get Mixie to start it off. My first fade is going to be Mr. Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets. Now, the Garrett Wilson situation is a little bit more dire than we originally thought, and here's why. Personally, I'm usually a big proponent for college connections. I both profited from that, but I've also been burned by that. And this is a situation where it's looking like you're going to get burned by it more likely than not. There's a common misconception that Justin Fields likes to target his first reads, but over the years, his rates don't really follow those same trends. Back in 2021, he was 19th in first read rate. 2022, he was 17th. 2023 and 2024, he was 34th and 35th, respectively. So not something he very much does. Obviously, last year off a limited sample size as well. But with that being said, this offense appears to be very, very run heavy. And this is probably to help alleviate issues that the offense would have. Like Justin Fields has an issue with getting sacked over the years. So they're probably going to be pretty close to the bottom of the league in terms of passing attempts. And with that being said, Garrett Wilson last year finishes the wide receiver 16, and that was with 154 targets. Just to get that same volume, I took just kind of ran the numbers from Justin Fields, I guess, highest volume passing year, but also his most efficient passing year as well, excluding 2024. Taking a look at 2023, where he threw for 2,562 yards. But just taking a look at that year, if we were to extrapolate that over a full season, Justin Fields would have had 484 attempts. So for Garrett Wilson to get similar volume to 154 targets that he got, he would need a 32% target share, which is 3% higher than he's ever had at any point in his career, no matter who's been back there at quarterback. So this would require for both Justin Fields and Garrett Wilson to both have career years for this to be a good year for Garrett Wilson, which is why I'm thinking that he's still going to be a good fantasy option, but he's not going to be a great fantasy option. And where he's going, you want him to be great. And I think that he's going to be limited and capped by this offense. So draft Jets at your own peril, honestly.
I think that's incredibly well said. Yeah, going in the middle of the third round, you want to draft these guys that you think have the possibility or the chance to potentially be drafted, around the 1-2 turn or early in the second round the following year. You want guys that are really going to make a splash. And like you said, I think Garrett Wilson, he might have a decent floor because he is going to be heavily targeted in this offense, but I don't think that his ceiling is very high. You made the mention of how run heavy this offense is going to be, the whole coaching staff coming over from the Lions and realizing that they don't have quite the quarterback that they did in Detroit. So they're really going to lean on that run game. And that's where a lot of the talent on this team is too. Outside of Garrett Wilson, they have next to nothing from the pass catching position. So yeah, even if he does command that 30% target share, which I don't think is entirely unreasonable, it's going to be of a very low total volume of passes. And also, like you mentioned with Justin Fields, in terms of like total team dropbacks, Justin Fields tends to turn a lot of those team dropbacks into sacks and scrambles and things of that nature. So even on designed passing plays, the ball's not actually going to be thrown very often. So I think that's a great take with Garrett Wilson to start us out.
Absolutely. So who do you have for us as your first fade?
My guy is going to be Marvin Harrison Jr. And as I talked about at the top of the video, we don't hate these players as individuals. I actually really like Marvin Harrison Jr. I think that he's a good football player. I think that he's probably going to take a leap from year 1 to year 2 even. But the crux of my argument here is that I think he was very clearly a very bad pick at cost last year. I don't think anybody can argue against that. And while I do think it's reasonable to expect, like I said, for him to improve from year 1 to year 2, nothing about his situation has changed in a way that would lead me to believe that he's going to be a better fantasy producer in year 2. In fact, I think some of the things have actually gotten worse. So first off, I think he's just a bad fit with his quarterback. The best part of Marv's game as a prospect, and as we saw in the separation metrics in his first year in the NFL, is his ability to attack the intermediate level of the field on horizontally breaking routes. So digs, slants, things of that nature. But unfortunately for him, and people might think I'm joking about this, but I'm being dead serious. Kyler's too short to see the middle of the field. Like, he just can't have a good connection or a consistent connection on those type of routes because he can't see that area of the field and he's not confident throwing those balls. You saw most of the connection between these two happen out on the boundary, and that's because that's where Kyler can actually see him. But a lot of those boundary throws are really low percentage throws, as we saw last year. So I have some stats here that I'll read off to you guys. According to Player Profiler, Marv's target accuracy rating was 92nd in the league last year. His catchable target rate was 68%, which was 64th in the league. And his catch rate, so just the amount of targets that he's turning into or converting into receptions, it was an abysmal 53%. Part of that, I'll acknowledge, is due to some of the struggles that Marv had at the catch point last year, and he absolutely has the ability to improve upon that going into year 2. But I would place the majority of the blame on Kyler's ball placement and just the overall difficulty of those types of throws. So knowing that, and obviously we know Kyler isn't going to get any taller, I don't see Marv's game really being unlocked, at least in that category this year. And then part of the reason that I think the situation might be getting worse is that he's still dealing with Drew Petzing as his offensive coordinator, and Arizona was only 22nd in pass rate last season at 55%. This team is predicated on a physical run attack, and I don't see that changing. They were also only 22nd in plays per game. So we're talking low pass volume and low play volume. And they also put these metrics up while facing the third most difficult strength of schedule last year. So even though they were a bad football team playing against really good football teams and losing frequently, they still refused to pass very often and didn't pick up the tempo. So I just think, it's going to be tough given those circumstances and considering the fact that their strength of schedule improved to 11th this year, that they're really going to change any of that towards a more pass-heavy, pass-friendly scenario. And also worth noting, I think their defense is going to improve as well. They spent 6 of their 7 draft picks this year on defensive players and spent a lot in free agency to improve their defensive line. So that will also kind of further that ball control mentality, running the ball game script. So I don't see a reason why we would be taking Marv at the wide receiver 14, like 28 spots higher than, as you can see, where he finished in 2024. I don't see that jump happening for him in year 2, even if he does take a step forward based on the scenario around him.
No, I 100% agree. I think that the jump up that people expect, like you said, from 42 to 14 is just way too dramatic. Just a couple more stats to back up what you said. Marvin Harrison was pretty bad at separating last year as well. And time is going to tell if him gaining weight / muscle was really the right move as to alleviate that issue. He created an average of 2 yards of separation on his targets, which out of 84 receivers which qualified for that stat, he ranked 84th. And out of 116 of his targets, 40 of them, he had less than 1 yard of separation, and he only caught 12 of those passes. So he has to get better at this. Like you said, he has to get better at the catch point, which is something that he can improve upon. But he's also just going to have to be a better separator. They're going to have to get a little bit more inventive with how they deploy him. And like you said, with them having the same personnel there, I just don't know if this is the year that that's going to happen.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, and I'm glad that we're on alignment on that one. Let's move on to your number 2 fade. Who's that going to be?
Absolutely. My number 2 fade is going to be Mr. DK Metcalf. This is a more confusing fade right here because everyone expects him to be the pure, number one receiver for this offense, which he is by financial and by, status within the wide receiver room. But with that also being said, I just don't know how much there is to be found for DK Metcalf. And I also don't really know how much juice DK Metcalf really has. As you see from the graphic up here, he finishes the wide receiver 33 in points per game. And that was in a pass heavy Ryan Grubb offense that was top 10 in pass attempts. He left that offense to join an Arthur Smith offense that has historically always leaned on the run game and on tight ends. With that being said, his ceiling is going to be severely capped by this just low upside, low volume offense. And historically speaking, for Arthur Smith as a head coach or even as an offensive coordinator, he doesn't produce top 25 receivers in fantasy. Historically speaking, he's only ever had one, and that's A.J. Brown in 2020. I think he was the wide receiver 5 that year.
Yeah.
But other than that, he has never produced another top 25 fantasy receiver as the number one option in his offense. I don't think that trend is going to break this year with DK Metcalf. I don't think Aaron Rodgers is the answer. I know we've seen Aaron Rodgers hyper target guys, but also those guys are like Devontae Adams, who were historically good at separating. So, yeah, any quarterback worth their salt is going to hyper target a guy like that. I just don't know if DK Metcalf is going to be able to, one, sustain volume like that in an offense like this, and two, I don't know if he's going to be able to do anything with it with low volume in an offense like this. We just never seen it from him. So you'd be banking on a lot for DK to finish as the wide receiver 26 in this situation where he's already finished as way worse than the wide receiver 26 in a way better situation.
Yeah, I completely agree. We talked about this off air as well. This was a guy that we were kind of fighting for to have as a fade on each of our respective lists. I think it's very similar to the Garrett Wilson fade that we talked about earlier. I think that he's really the only viable target option in that offense. And so there is a little bit of a floor in terms of we know he's going to have a high target share. But I think he's not as talented as Garrett Wilson. He's certainly not as talented as Devontae Adams. He's not as talented as AJ Brown, who you mentioned as the last time Arthur Smith had, a really fantasy viable wide receiver 1 in their offense. And so I don't really see a reason to be targeting him. He finished last year, like you mentioned, in a higher volume passing offense, worse than where we're having to draft him now. So yeah, I think all of what you said makes a ton of sense, and I'm definitely trying to avoid DK this year.
Absolutely. Leave him alone right there. Honestly, the Steelers kind of leave him alone right there, but we'll get more onto that later. Who do you have for your
Foreshadowing.
next fade? Yeah, you know what I'm saying?
We'll leave that one for a little bit later in the video. But the next one that I have up here, let's add him to the screen. It's going to be Baker Mayfield. Okay. And this one's a little bit different than the first few that we've had up on the screen, where you saw that it was a little bit more obvious in terms of where they finished in 2024, where they clearly finished worse than where they're being drafted now. And so that just makes more logical sense. It's easier to track. This one might confuse some people, right? Because he finished as the QB4 with 21 and a half points per game in 2024, and now he's being drafted at QB7. Some people might think that that's a value. But I would like to correct that line of thinking. I think that regression is coming for Baker Mayfield this year in a big way. So I'm going to throw a lot of stats and numbers at you guys real quick. I'm going to try to go through it slowly so that it makes sense. Will stop me if I'm going too fast, but I'm going to get into this. I collected some of this on my own. I also got a lot of it from Rich Rebar and JJ Zacharyson. So shout out to them. Go to the industry. Go check them out as well. So Baker last year threw for 41 passing touchdowns. 41, huge number. His previous career high was 28. He scored 21 and a half fantasy points per game last year. His previous career high, 17.1. He accumulated 3.3 rushing points per game last year. That was actually more than double almost any other season of his career. So just in terms of what he's done in the past, this doesn't seem to be sustainable. It seems more like an outlier. In terms of the offense in general, the Bucs as a team scored on over 50% of their possessions last year. We've seen 21 teams reach that mark. only one of them scored at a higher rate the next season. And of those 21 teams, they collectively scored an average of 14 fewer touchdowns the following season. The Bucs also had 57 offensive touchdowns, and 72% of those came through the air. Both of those metrics were top 5 in the league and are not easily sustainable year over year. This note I think is a little bit more anecdotal, but I still think it's interesting. Baker actually fumbled 13 times last year and only lost 3 of them. So I don't anticipate that ratio continuing. Who knows what his fumble rate's going to be, but that's a lot of points that stayed in his favor last year that probably wouldn't have just based on probability. So there's a lot of math and data there that suggests that he should probably be coming a little bit closer towards the mean, but this one I think is the biggest. I want to point to his touchdown rate, 7.2%. Since 2011, there have been 15 quarterbacks with next season data that have been between 6.7 and 7.7 in their touchdown rate. So that gives a little bit of wiggle room on either side of Baker's number from last year. The average points per game for those quarterbacks in the season that they had that high touchdown rate was 21.4, almost identical to Baker's number. The average points per game the next season for those quarterbacks, 17.2. 17.2 points per game would have been the quarterback 15 last year. And not a single one of those quarterbacks from that data set saw their points per game increase or even maintain at the same level the following year. So again, basic math, probability, I just think that this is a bad bet. And that's not even to mention the fact that Liam Cohen is now gone. The screen game and the quick game were emphasized under Liam Cohen, and that's what took this offense to new heights, what improved upon Baker's previous career highs, like I mentioned. But when Baker held the ball longer than 2.5 seconds, his touchdown to interception ratio went to 14 and 13, nearly identical, even split. His completion rate went from 78% down to 63%. And we've seen so far this offseason the new offensive coordinator, Josh Grizzard. He's talked about wanting the offense to be more vertical this year. And so if he's true to his word, that would lead to Baker holding onto the ball longer, even more emphasizing those negative tendencies. And then lastly, I just want to bring up all of the injuries that we've seen from Tampa this offseason. Tristan Wirfs, arguably the best offensive tackle in the NFL. Sounds like he's probably going to miss at least a few weeks to start the season. Chris Godwin, still not healthy. Could start the season on the PUP. I think we got word today that they're going to try to avoid that, but we also found out that there was way more to his injury than was initially let on. There was a fracture to his fibula, and so it's really going to bleed into the season in terms of his abilities. Jalen McMillan, now unlikely to play until around midseason due to his neck strain. Mike Evans, currently healthy, but obviously has a long track record of injuries, and he's entering his age 32 season. So I just don't see a reason to draft Baker at his cost of QB7 when a lot of these guys from like the QB 12 to 20 range are likely to score very similarly or even outscore him at those prices.
I absolutely agree. I think that people discount the loss of Liam Cohen to this offense, what that's going to do. And just to further what you said, I think it was earlier today that they activated Chris Godwin and Tristan Wirfs off the pup. But obviously, they're going to have to work their way back to the field. So they're going to end up missing time. And like you said with Chris Godwin, it's just not good news coming out of there. Also losing Jalen McMillan for the season as well. Not great news for that camp as well. So it's just we're going to have to see how this offense shapes out. But with that being said, it's already not shaping out in Baker's favor. So you might as well get off the train while you can.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Let's move on to your last fade of the video. Who's that going to be?
My last fade is probably the softest fade of the video, but it's going to be Mr. Josh Downs of the Indianapolis Colts. So like I said, this isn't any hate towards Josh Downs at all as a player. We think he's phenomenal as a player, as a prospect.
We
It's
both
more
do.
of a
Huge fan.
Absolutely. It's more of a Colts hate situation than anything. Because as we all know, Daniel Jones was named the starter of that offense. So we're in for some very mid and unexciting offense. So where A-Rich kind of provided at least some excitement to this offense, Daniel Jones is going to replace that with some consistency, but there's going to be some inefficiency to be found in that consistency. The only consistency is really that it's low A-dot play. But with that being said, I feel like there's going to be a bit of a log jam when it comes to roles and targets because Josh Downs isn't just going to be competing with Michael Pittman Jr. for these, low A-dot targets. He's also going to be competing with Tyler Warren, who I think he participated in every starting rep except for maybe one. So they're already getting him involved a lot to start out the season. So there's the argument that Wan'Dale Robinson got 140 targets last year from Daniel Jones, and that he's just kind of a Temu Josh Downs. But my counter to that is that the surrounding talent around Downs is way better than that of the Giants last year. So currently at the 115th overall, going 10 spots ahead of guys like Michael Pittman at 125 or Keon Coleman at 121, who's potentially the wide receiver one in his offense. I just feel like it's a little bit too rich for my blood, but I wouldn't be mad if you took Josh Downs in this instance. I just don't think it's the best value in this offense right now.
Yeah, I think for the most part, I agree with you. We alluded to the fact that we really like his analytical profile and his efficiency so far as a receiver throughout his career. But yeah, you said that Daniel Jones is going to provide consistency, and I don't even know if that's true. Maybe more so than Anthony Richardson, but I think he's incredibly up and down. I think that we're in for a real roller coaster with this Indianapolis offense. And yeah, I think you made a great point, especially about Tyler Warren. He's had, like you said, like a 91% participation rate with the first team offense. He's had over a 20% target share in both of their first preseason games. And so he's going to be heavily, heavily involved in a very similar level in depth in terms of where they're targeted compared to Josh Downs. And I think you're absolutely right in terms of like the talent depth at receiver. There's a lot of mouths to feed there, and not probably a lot of passing volume, and certainly not a lot of accurate passing volume.
Yeah,
So I completely agree from that standpoint. I hate to put Josh Downs on a fade list, but I think it's warranted in this instance.
absolutely. And who are we rounding this list out with?
The last one, as we kind of foreshadowed earlier, is another Steeler. It's going to be Kaleb Johnson, the rookie out of Iowa. So I do want to add a quick few positive notes here because I know that people are going to kind of argue with me in terms of my fade, my position here. He did dominate in an outside zone scheme at Iowa coming out of college, and he gets paired with Arthur Smith, who runs an outside zone scheme in Pittsburgh. So I do think that the fit is a relatively good one. Arthur Smith obviously also employs a run heavy attack, which we talked about earlier, where the running backs are going to see a lot of touches, potentially another point in Kaleb's favor. And Aaron Rodgers being the new quarterback likely means a higher than average, probably amount of checkdowns to the backs. And so that could potentially be another green flag for Kaleb Johnson. But I think while these points could potentially be used as an argument in his favor, I think there's also a flip side to that coin as to why they could be negatives. So first off, just in terms of his actual standing on the team, currently at best, I think he's second on the depth chart. He's been working behind Jaylen Warren, who has just been resting through the first two preseason games. And actually, as we're recording this, the Steelers are playing a preseason game right now. I checked out the beginning of the game before we hopped on here. Jaylen Warren did play, and then Kenneth Gainwell came on the field, and then it was Kaleb Johnson. So that was going to be my next point, is that he's actually working behind Kenneth Gainwell so far in the preseason as well, and that has continued throughout each week that we've seen. Camp reports suggest that he's been struggling in pass protection and with some of his route concepts out of the backfield. Those two things especially will not and have not gone over well with Aaron Rodgers. He's an old crotchety vet that's only going to want to play with guys that he can trust to be in the right place at the right time. And so far, Kaleb Johnson has done kind of the opposite of that. At least that's what's been reported out of Steelers camp. And I think that presents maybe even more of an obstacle than most rookies would probably encounter in order to earn playing time. It's also worth noting that Jaylen Warren is excellent in pass protection and very effective as a pass catcher. I think he's just kind of better all around as a running back than a lot of people give him credit for. And so I think the bar to surpassing Jaylen Warren, if he wants to get to the RB1 level, and the bar just to earning trust and earning reps on this offense is probably higher than you would expect for a lot of other rookie backs. And then on top of all of that, things that we already talked about with DK Metcalf, this offense is projected to be really low scoring. We're talking about projected for 28th in the league in terms of points scored. They're projected to be very slow paced. Arthur Smith, we talked about him as well. He has a history of run heavy offenses that run at a very slow rate. Surprisingly, last year they actually finished closer to league average in that metric, but now they bring in Aaron Rodgers, who is like the king of moving at a glacial pace. The Jets were 30th in terms of their pace of play last year. And I expect a number closer to kind of that bottom 5, bottom 10 number again for the Steelers this year. So just to kind of round things out, Johnson is probably going to start slow. We're not going to see a lot of opportunities, and certainly not a lot of consistent fantasy viable opportunities early in the season. I think because of Warren's skill set and Kaleb's deficiencies in those similar areas, I find it really unlikely that he's going to see many third downs or obvious passing situations. And so the valuable touches that you get as a receiver, he's probably not going to see throughout most of, if not all of the season. And then the area where I think he might have the best chance to carve out a role is as the short yardage grinder and potentially goal line back. But if the team is likely to finish bottom 10 or worse in scoring, that role is just not going to be very valuable. So the fact that he's going a full round ahead of his teammate Jaylen Warren and around guys that I just think the upside is way higher doesn't make any sense to me.
Absolutely. It's like you said, when you have a running back in fantasy, you want them to really be involved in those passing plays and those passing opportunities because it really does raise that bar that much higher. And if you can't block, you're not going to be out there in those opportunities. And as we've also learned, shout out to Nick Ercolano, BDGE, but rushing touchdowns are more of a team success statistic than a player success statistic. So if this
Absolutely.
team isn't successful, then the running backs aren't going to be successful when it comes to getting those goal line, red zone opportunities, 10 zone opportunities. So, like I said, or like Eric said, Kaleb Johnson is going to have to grow up a little bit as a running back. He's going to have to mature a little bit more, get a little bit better at blocking, make sure he's actually on the field more in just more opportunities than he's going to get right now, as you know, as it stands with the team. Because, like you said, Aaron Rodgers is not going to trust you out there if you're not going to make those blocks because he doesn't want to get hit. He's
Yeah,
getting way too old for that. The team doesn't
way
want
too
him to get
old.
hit. So they got to protect their guys. And also, just something interesting that I found as well. I found that Kaleb Johnson plays kind of at his best when the quarterback plays under center because he has sort of a downhill style to him, gets a lot of steam behind that. But with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback, he's known to play in the gun a lot as well. So, kind of two playing styles that don't really mesh. Again, something Kaleb Johnson's going to have to grow into and just kind of mold himself more into, as time goes along during the season. But is that something I'm betting on this year? No, not for running back 26 prices.
Yeah, that's something I hadn't even considered. I think that's a really good point. Aaron Rodgers at 40 plus years old and his inability to really move anymore, he has to play out of the gun. And so, yeah, that's going to make the run game and specifically to Kaleb Johnson much less effective. So I think that's a very good point.
Mm-hmm.
But that will round things out. I appreciate everyone who stuck with us throughout this video. I hope you guys took something valuable away from it. These were our 6 players, our kind of all fade list guys that we're not touching in fantasy drafts this year. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, leave them down in the comments below. We'd love to talk to you guys. And like I mentioned at the top of the video, if you guys have drafts coming up this weekend and you're not going to be able to watch our videos next week, giving you even more preparation, join the link or join the Discord at the link in the description, and hopefully we can help you out in there. But yeah, I think that's going to do it for us. We appreciate you guys as always, and we will catch you in the next video. Peace.
Peace.